and welcome to Helen. It's really nice to talk to you again.
Nice to be here, Sheila.
Thanks for participating in this year's Prince Edward County Authors Festival, and thanks to the County Library for hosting this conversation. And before we get to our first reading, Helen, I'd like to start at the very beginning. And by this, I mean the very beginning. The cover art and design is by Na Kim. It's very handsome. Is it a Vizsla?
Yes, it is. It's she's works for FSG, my American publisher, but she also is a pet portraitist in her spare time. And so she did that a picture of Fig, actually, when Fig was a baby, that I sent to her, and she made a portrait of Fig based on.
I wondered. Yeah, it's really quite lovely.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It gets her expression nicely.
Yeah. So that's as she's a puppy?
Yeah, she's about 4 months old there, I think.
Oh, she actually looks quite mature. But I guess she'd have a longer snout.
Yeah, the snout grows as they get older. So I mean, it does stop at some point, but it grows into adulthood.
So I'll say to the folks who are listening, anytime you want to put a question into the chat box, it'll pop up and I can see it. And so don't hesitate to ask questions as we go along, and I'll try to fit them in. But first, let's start with a reading, Helen. Can we have your first reading?
Sure. I'm just going to read. It's quite near the beginning of the book, so I don't need to say much about it, I think. Just as picking a title for a book is either easy, in that it occurs right away, sometimes before the book has even been started, or impossible, meaning that no title seems right ever, so it is for the naming of a dog. Hazel was decided before the puppy was brought home. The color that is hazel is roughly the shade of a Vizsla's coat and eyes. Also, at the time, it felt unique, not being a popular name for either human or canine. Those were the reasons we picked it for the puppy, and it always seemed right, although children had trouble with it, and Hazel was sometimes called Weasel by anyone under the age of 10. Charlotte was one of dozens of names that I tried out on the new puppy in the weeks after she was living with me. Before she was Charlotte, she was Rosie, Wallace, Harris, and a dozen other names that I can no longer remember. I settled on Charlotte because it seemed a vaguely aristocratic name, and the puppy had a rather imperious quality to her. This time, I want a name that isn't a human name at all, but is a piece of nature. I have tried and discarded various trees: ash, maple, rowan, larch. For a while, I was thinking of cricket and then clover, but both names are hard to yell, feel too much of a mouthful for the countless times I will be trying to call the dog away from rolling ecstatically in the guts of a dead fish, or eating fresh, steaming piles of horse shit, or swimming out into the middle of the lake after ducks. In the end, I'm not the one who thinks of the name. My stepdaughter, in a moment of clairvoyance, texts that she wants the dog to be born on her birthday, which it nearly was, and proclaims that it should be called Fig. I like the name for its clarity and for how easy it is to say emphatically, and also for the possibility of using it in different ways: Figgy, Figlet. I amuse myself by making up lots of nicknames for my dogs. In the last year of her life, I hardly ever called Charlotte by her real name, but instead was calling her mostly Joe or Fred. I had tired of her original name, and it didn't really matter what I called her, because she and I understood one another without words. So Fig seems good, right? Also, the Vizsla with its dark red fur somewhat resembles the color of a ripe Calamirna fig. Charlotte has been dead for 5 months, and I miss her constantly. The months of being without a dog have been hard. The house has been so empty. Walking has felt pointless. So I'm anxious to fill my life and my home with a new dog. I'll stop there.
Thanks. So this book is it's a memoir. It's a memoir of your writing life, and you take the reader through the dogs that have been in your life, and in fact, it's dedicated to your dog pack. And so Charlotte is the dog you had. Is Charlotte the dog you had before Fig?
Yeah, I've had 3 Vizslas. So Charlotte was my second Vizsla, Hazel was my first, and Fig is my third and probably last.
And why would she be your last?
Well, I'm getting older, and the Vizsla is a really high energy dog, and it's sort of on the edge of my limits now to exercise her properly. So I don't think, do it one more time. They could run all day basically, and I can't run all day. So there you have it.
I heard your recent interview with Lynn Pickering on the County Writes, County Reads, and after you read that passage, you told an anecdote about a dog responding, or how a dog might respond to a change in its name. And it turns out it's not about the name; it's about the tone, a voice that a dog learns. Has Fig figured out her name, or is it just how you say it?
Yeah, she knows her name, I think. She recognizes it. She's actually, of all my dogs, very she knows a lot of human words. Sometimes I can just speak full sentences to her and she'll get the gist of most of, kind of what I'm saying if it relates to her. So yeah, she knows her name. She's smart.
What about has Fig started to talk to you yet?
She does talk to me a little bit in her kind of complainy voice, but I don't know. She's almost 4, so we're not quite at the point. I mean, sort of around 8, I think you kind of know you know each other very intimately in the sort of dog human bond. So we're getting there, but still got a ways to go.
Towards the end of the book, you talk about how your dogs do communicate with you and what that's taught you about how to listen to yourself, how listening to what they're trying to communicate, if you do that, you'll get along with them better. And then you say it's not dissimilar to writing, where it's more effective to listen to intuition than try and force your will upon work. Which leads me to the question of your reflections on how dogs have taught you, because the book tells dog stories, your own and others, and interwoven are reflections or meditations on the applicability of the lessons that you've learned from those stories to your writing life. And I wonder if that applies only to your fiction, or do you observe that in poetry as well, in your poetry?
I don't think so, because one, I don't write poetry very much anymore. I mostly write fiction or creative nonfiction now. I mostly write prose. And so I think those dog lessons apply very well to prose, lessons about character or structure or this and that. Poetry is more, a kind of a burst of feeling and craft. And so I don't think it would work as well. I don't know, and I don't write. I'm just not writing that much poetry, so maybe it would. But
yeah, as you say, there's various elements in prose and in a novel, and this is a book about your writing life. Each chapter is separated into different elements of a novel, starting appropriately with beginnings and moving through character and structure and so on. And it feels like the book itself feels like kind of a progress or a next step, or I'm not sure what the word is, a natural evolution. Because what I'm thinking about is Machine Without Horses. You didn't have Fig in mind when you wrote Machine Without Horses about 5 years ago, but was Machine a step towards what a dog called Fig became?
I don't. I mean, maybe in retrospect, but at the time, I don't. Things happen very organically, so I don't really have a thing in mind beyond the thing I'm doing often, or if I do it, it often doesn't work out properly anyway. So the Fig book came about. Really, I wasn't going to write a book about dogs at all, but I had a puppy. I had forgotten how horrible it was to have a puppy and how I had literally like no moment to myself. And I realized I couldn't write during that first year, or much of that first year that I had the puppy. So I just thought, well, because the dog was reminding me of other dogs, I thought, well, I'll just write about the puppy itself and herself, and then I might just write some things down about other dogs. So it just kind of evolved like that. But I didn't have anything in mind. When you finish a book, often you think you're never going to write another one. I think it's the very common thing writers feel, right? That's it for you. That's over. And I've said it multiple times. Oh, well, that's the last one for me, or that's, but then usually you get another idea and you move forward. So it's but yeah, anyway, but things happen more kind of organically for me. They just sort of appear as ideas. They're not
It,
premeditated.
in the characters section, you comment about anomalies in personality. And over the course of your time with your dogs, you've observed what you've described as personality deviations. A brave dog can be afraid of thunder. And then you connect these observations to the knitting World War II soldier that you created in your book, The Lost Garden. So was the comfort with, or the confidence to create an outlier element of a character something you'd already learned from your dogs and applied it? Or many of the connections you see between you and your writing and the dogs, is that something that you observe in hindsight?
Yeah, sometimes, or sometimes I observe it when it's happening, or I just intuit it, or I realize a pattern, you know. I mean, it's the dogs that made me realize with character that you can have an anomaly. And but you can't have too many anomalies, right? So, you know, the brave dog can be afraid of thunder, but you know, usually that's the sort of deviation from the bravery, like, right? So you couldn't support, and if you're creating a human character in a story, you can support one anomaly, but it would start to feel unbelievable if you had two, three, right? Then what is your character, right? You have to give the reader something reliable to hold on to. So yeah, anyway, that's.
And that's, it brings me back again to Machine Without Horses, because it's not, Machine Without Horses isn't you, but there's that element of writing process that's so prominent in Machine. And uh, is that something, I mean, I suppose the question leads to a question about memoir, which is, how did you come to the point of this memoir? And I say this one because Nocturne, which you wrote about 10 years ago, is about the aftermath of the death of your brother. So how did you know? I mean, you've described how it kind of happened organically, but how did you know you were ready to write this one, or that it was time to write this one?
Well, I basically just started to write it. And then I thought, well, I'll keep a puppy diary and see how that goes. And then the puppy diary led me to think about my other dogs I had had. And Charlotte had very recently died, and she was a very, you know, important dog to me. And so I started, you know, writing some things down about her. Then I thought, well, I wonder if other writers, you know, I knew some other writers had dogs, but I thought I'm going to look into just the dogs that other writers had. And I went down that avenue. And then I kind of started to think about how it related to writing. And so all the sort of threads, they didn't come in all at once. They just came in piece by piece. And I wasn't sure, when I was doing the puppy diary, I didn't think it was a book. I thought I was just keeping a puppy diary so I could keep writing during the process of having the puppy. But then at a certain point, when I started folding in all the other elements, I thought, oh, this is probably a book. And then I started to, you know, do it more kind of seriously, I guess. But things, you know, that's how things work for me. They just sort of evolve. They don't, and half the time, often when I'm starting, I don't actually know what I'm doing until I can figure out a way to kind of coalesce it and think about it in a way that makes sense. I just sort of follow what I'm interested in, and that often leads to something else, and I follow that. And so
You talked about, in Fig, you talk about writing Lost Garden, observing that it was an easy novel to write. And so it sounds like A Dog Named Fig was easy as well.
No, actually, a dog called Fig was hard because it wasn't hard to, of course, write the puppy. You know, it's very easy to record what the puppy's doing every day and that sort of thing. But what was hard in this book was I had to braid together. There's 4 or 5 different elements, and they had to be braided together to feel seamless, and that was very difficult. It was it's, you know, you can usually braid together 2 or 3 things, but I think there was 4 or 5. I can't really remember what there is in this one, but there's just those, you know, the other writers' stories with their dogs, my puppy diary, my other dogs, writing life, and uh something else. I don't know. I think there's, anyway. So it's that the weave was very difficult to do, and I had to take a couple of runs at it. I had to do a big rewrite. So yeah, it was not an easy book.
Well, it works.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you You also said in the book that writing the memoir about your brother was the first time you'd put your real world into a book. And it was sad, but it was liberating. And memoirs seem to be an exercise in choice, what gets put in, what gets revealed, because there's no fiction to hide behind. So how do you decide, or how have you decided, and how have you come to terms with what might be for you revelatory? How do you make those decisions?
Yeah, I mean, memoir doesn't have fiction, but it operates structurally very, very much like fiction. So it has to have a story, there has to be a journey, there has to be something happening to a character, usually yourself, because they're self-directed. So it has all the elements of fiction. There have to be characters. It's just sort of true, whereas fiction is fiction. So but it's a very similar structure. So I think I approach it very similarly to how I write a novel. And I have to figure out what's going. First of all, the big thing with memoir for me anyway is to decide, is this story interesting enough for somebody else to want to read? Because a lot of personal stories, aren't interesting enough to other people. They're just our personal stories and they matter to us, but do they matter to somebody who's going to buy a book? So that's, that's the place where I start usually, actually, is thinking, is this something? And I'm often unsure, like with Nocturne, I was unsure that my personal sort of grief over my brother dying would actually matter to anybody else. So I did a little tester for that book, and I published a little piece of it in a magazine to see if there was a response to it, and there was a response, and a good response. So then I thought, okay, perhaps I can do it as a book. So that's kind of how it is. It's trying to figure it out. And with the dogs, making it sort of, I mean, these are my dogs, like who's going to care really about my dogs? But if I kind of put it in with other writers and their dogs, which is kind of interesting, and there's photographs in the book, and then also just relate it to the writing process, then there's levels on which people can engage with it that aren't just the one sort of through line of me and my dogs. So.
And does what you provide in terms of personal information, does that come easily, or do you struggle over what you'll reveal and what you won't reveal?
I don't mind revealing things, I'm a very private person, oddly enough, but when I'm writing, I'm okay with revealing things about myself, although I don't, who knows what you wouldn't reveal. So I don't know. I'm okay with that, because when you're writing, it's very private thing anyway. The reader's not there. Nobody's there. You're just writing by yourself. So it's kind of like you are by yourself. You just say the things you want to say. And I know with writing, this is something I always say to my students, you have to be honest. You cannot not be honest. If you're not honest, no one will want to read anything you write. It's just rings with a kind of falsity. But so sometimes the honest things are hard things to say, but you have to be prepared to say them.
Well, Melanie asks, reading the book, I felt you were obviously still grieving Charlotte. And when Fig came along, she was being continually compared with Charlotte and not coming out the best. How do you feel about this now?
Yeah, I think the journey for me in the book of Fig was to actually let go of Charlotte. I sort of say near the end, you have to kind of move on with the new thing. You have to, in a way, let go of the old thing. And I was holding too firmly to the old dog, because my old dog she was a fantastic dog. She was like a dog of a lifetime. And Figgy is a great dog, but I had to let go of the old dog. So yeah, I think that was the journey that I came to, the conclusion I came to in the process of writing the book. And I think that's what, sort of had to happen. I had to leave one dog behind to actually enjoy the other one. And that's the case now. I mean, I think of Charlotte from time to time, but Figgy's the dog now. So
Yeah. Each section it's full of wise observations. I have to say I particularly enjoyed this one. I'm just going to read that. Behavior is different from character. The former can be modified. The latter is fairly fixed and has to be born. But once you learn someone's character, you can figure out how to work around it. Character can be mitigated by attachment. The greater one's attachment to another, the more one will forgive. and nowhere is this better displayed than in one's relationship to dogs. Character traits that would be judged to be intolerable in a fellow human are often tolerated in a dog. I never were truer words spoken. This doesn't actually lead to any kind of pithy question. I was just so struck with it. It's kind of a personal aside. We have a mad granddogger, but we love her to bits. And so that was a very striking remark about one's relationship to not just dogs, but I suppose people as well that you're close to.
Yes. I mean, what struck me when I was researching other writers and their dogs was how bad some of those dogs were. Like kind of, I mean, Thomas Hardy's dog, who walked across the dinner table and took food from the plates of the other diners that just and bit people really quite badly regularly, and was addicted to a radio program, Children's Hour. I mean, so Thomas Hardy bought him his own radio, and the dog listened every day to this program. And when Thomas Hardy was rehearsing one of his plays in a village, distant from the one he lived in, it came time for the show, and the dog was with him, and the dog made such a fuss he had to drive the dog home in the middle of his play rehearsal so the dog could listen to the radio. So I mean, no writer would do that with another human, but it was so kind of touching, and I really enjoyed all those other writers' bad dogs. They were.
Well, there's also Muggs, Thurber's childhood dog.
Yeah.
And his family coped with Muggs in an interesting way, who appeared to bite everybody. But I guess, in this day and age, Muggs and other bad dogs would have a harder time of it, because perhaps our expectations of dogs or what we'll tolerate has changed. I mean, now we have I don't know what it's called. I can't remember what it's like, the Bad Dog Act in Ontario. And there's all sorts of civil liability, and the dog person will come to your door and give you a hard time. But I do wonder about that. Have we changed what we expect of our dogs? And partly, I guess I'm thinking of Walter's dog in your book, Wild Dogs.
Yeah, I think, dogs back in the day used to roam around. They weren't, they could just go, like Muggs went out all day and then came home, to eat something in the evening. So who knows what Muggs got up to? Like, lots of dogs just had free reign. Even when I was young and growing up in the kind of suburbs of Toronto, there were dogs. The dogs were just kind of wandering around, and we knew where they lived, but they weren't on their property. They were just sort of doing their own dog thing. So I think that's changed, right? We keep our dogs in our houses now. They don't kind of, I mean, maybe in the country a little bit, but mostly they just don't have that same freedom. We leash them. Some dogs never go off a leash, which I feel is just very, hard. They don't.
To come back to the character element, that section of the book, you continue the idea of a deviant personality. Oh, that's probably not the right word, but you continue the idea talking about the character of Charles Sainte-Beuve in The Reinvention of Love. And you ask the question, can a bad dog help to make a good writer? So how do you answer that?
Yes, because a bad dog teaches you about character, right? It teaches you a lot of things. I mean, I bet, Thomas Hardy, when his dog died, his terrible dog, Wessex, he was just heartbroken. He carved the tombstone for Wessex himself, and he's not a stone carver. But yes, so I think, they push you to a limit, right? Like a bad dog pushes you to the limit of what you have to put up with, and it teaches you a lot about character. It teaches you all kinds of things, because often, if we're left to our own devices, we surround ourselves often with like-minded people, with like-minded things. We don't want something to go, to challenge us. We kind of err on the side of ease, but a bad dog will force you into a challenging place all the time. And I think it's actually really, it's kind of good to have to just put up with things and figure out your way around them. I mean, Muggs, Thurber's mother, who had Muggs, the only way he would come back to the house on his big perambulations that he did around the neighborhood was he was afraid of thunder, like lots of dogs. And so she made a kind of machine out of a piece of sheet metal, and that would make the sound of thunder, and she would stand at the back door in the evening and make the sound of thunder so he would return to the house. But it's kind of, she would never have done that if the dog wasn't, so it pushed her in this way that, maybe is unnecessary, but also is interesting. And I
And
think,
it's compassionate. I mean, lots of people
yeah,
would have had nothing to do with mugs. How did you find all the stories? There's so many of them about authors and dogs.
yeah,
Did you
lots of,
just Google authors and dogs?
well, I knew some already. I mean, I knew Virginia Woolf had a dog, and I knew, I knew some of them a little bit, but yeah, I just sort of looked around. I don't know. There's yeah, I don't know. Lots of writers have dogs, modern and ancient, and they seem to fulfill the same purpose, to be sort of company in a place that you can't really have company in, and to kind of break the writing day up
Yeah.
into walks, which are good for everybody.
Well, there's no questions yet. I'm sure folks are just poised at their keyboard. So while we're waiting, how about the second passage you're going to read?
Sure. Let's look further on. Structure in a novel and in life is the perfect balance of order and chaos. The structure of a day could be the 4 dog walks undertaken at regular intervals throughout that day, but no walk will be the same as the next. Each one, even if it happens along the exact same route as the previous walk, will yield up a different combination of sightings and experiences. Similarly, a novel could be structured around 52 sections, each one representing a specific week of a year. This is a fairly strict structure, and yet what happens within those individual sections could be wildly diverse. I believe that the creative freedom inherent in this mix of the expected and the unexpected makes for the best writing. When I was thinking up my novel Wild Dogs, I decided to structure it after the way that a dog turns and turns before settling down to sleep. I wanted the story to turn like that, to circle back on itself and then continue again before coming to rest. The novel is about dogs, or rather, it is about our relationship with dogs, about wildness and domesticity and belonging. With this novel, I was moving deeper into my own relationship with dogs, having them infuse my writing sentence by sentence. In a way, Wild Dogs depended on my knowing what it would feel like to be a dog. And so I used to run through the forest with Hazel, vaulting fallen logs and cresting hills, my lungs burning and heart pounding, Hazel leading me enthusiastically deeper into the wilderness. One memorable day, we came upon a hawk carrying a squirrel. The squirrel was almost too heavy for the bird, and the hawk couldn't get the height it needed, so it flew just in front of us through the trees at head level. Without thinking, both the dog and I gave chase simultaneously, the dog wanting to catch the hawk, and me to keep the wondrous sight in view for as long as possible. Living with Hazel taught me the benefit of balancing the physical world of the dog with the interior writing life, and the wildness of the dog reinforced my own sense of wildness and gave me a sense of freedom as well as companionship. I think, too, that it kept my ideas fresh because I couldn't complacently sink into writerly habits. My being was constantly being shaken out of its routine by the needs of the dog to be a dog, to run through the woods or notice the movement of other animals. Having a dog and living some of the time on the dog's terms kept me immersed in the physical world. A part of me could always be animal in the company of the dog, and this kept me engaged with nature, with the life force, which is also the creative force.
Thank you. This passage suggests that you've not just learned or applied dog lessons to writing, but also how to welcome chaos or wildness into your own life. And I wonder the extent to which that feeds back into your writing.
Yeah, I think it keeps it fresh. I think when we try to control too much, it just stifles everything. And it's an illusion anyway. We can't, what do we really control? Hardly anything. And so I just think you just kind of go with what's happening, and I don't know, it keeps it fresh. And writing has to be fresh. If it feels stale, it doesn't work. If it's dishonest, it doesn't work. There's just all these ways in which it doesn't work. And so you have to keep it alive. And so you have to kind of keep your own sensibilities alive. You can't sort of do anything by route.
Wild Dogs, as you say, isn't about wild dogs. It's dogs connecting people, but it is deliberately structured with an eye to specific dog behavior. Are your other books equally deliberate applications of a lesson learned, not necessarily from dogs, but places dogs might take you? I mean, nature in more general terms.
I don't think so. I mean, it's hard, I write across a range of genre and a range of subjects, so I can't, I mean, yeah, all the lessons of dogs apply probably to everything, but every book is also individual and has its own series of problems and things going on with it. So I don't, yeah, I can't, an answer is not coming to mind for that.
The idea comes up in a different way, where you say, well, I have no desire to actually become a dog myself. You admire many of their characteristics. Chief among them is their ability to be entirely inside a moment and then switch easily and without regret into another moment. How does that apply to how you write?
Well, I don't know. Does it apply to how you write? I guess, to be able to move like that, the way a dog moves down a scent trail, right? A dog moves down a scent trail in the woods. They're following a scent and then they find another more interesting scent overlaid and they just move in that direction without a thought. They don't look back. They don't care about the scent trail they just left. They're onto this new thing. So I think you want writing to be as seamless as that. You want to be able to make it move in a way, off in a direction you want it to go without it seeming effortful. So I suppose that's, the lesson is to try to make it be as natural as that. Hard though. That's a hard one to do.
Yeah, well, you set that out, and in fact, the scent trail is a great illustration of that. And I think your point as well, as you say, is that there's no right or wrong way to do it, and maybe that's something else that we get from accepting chaos.
Yeah, that's right. There's no right or wrong way to do anything.
There's
really.
a really charming part of your book where you say that you always like questions about process. And you let the reader know that. And so you describe, for example, a very different experience between writing by hand and writing on the computer. Can you describe that?
Yeah, I mean, that used to be the big question people would ask back in the day when nobody
Yes.
asks it now because everybody writes on the computer. So I think people don't write by hand anymore, or majority of people don't. So it's kind of interesting that question has disappeared. But when I started out, it was a big question. And I used to write by hand for 4 or 5, 6, 7, I don't know, my early books, they were written by hand. And I thought it was really important I thought that was an important thing to do. And then at a certain point, I switched to the computer just for ease of getting in the draft down. And I found it didn't make any difference at all. that this thing that I had thought was great, hang on to the handwriting, do this, but I didn't notice any difference. In fact, I could go a bit faster on the computer. So it was funny. Yeah, that's that. I still like to take notes by hand in a notebook. That matters to me still, and I think that's a really effective and good thing to do. But it's just I think the writing by hand or writing on the computer is just about getting down the thought. The thoughts are the thing, right? It's how the brain's moving, and it doesn't in a way matter how you get it down. So anyway, in my experience.
Yeah. There's a quote. I just want to go back to authors and their dogs for a sec. There's a quote about Alice Walker when she's talking about her dog Marley. Now, I didn't mark that. So I'm not going to be able to find it. Oh, wait a minute, I know how to find it. Because you say that it makes you wonder. And I was wondering what you were wondering. Dogs understand something I was late in learning. This is Alice Walker. When we are mean to anyone or any being, it is because we are temporarily not ourselves. And so what you wonder is, after a lifetime spent with dogs, where they have been the single biggest influence on my work and my life? Do they make us better, or do they simply return us to who we are? Do you answer that question?
I don't think I do. It's a good question though. So I don't know. That's individual, I suppose. I don't know. Dogs have been there for me since the very beginning, right at the very beginning. So I can't actually tell. I think, I imagine for me, the dog returns me to myself. That's probably what happens, but maybe it's
Uh,
different for everybody.
what would you, I mean, the book is largely about the things that you've learned from your dogs, not just about writing, but about life in general. Has Fig taught you anything yet?
Yeah, Figgy's taught me a lot. Figgy's a very she's a dog of deep feeling, which means also very high sensitivity, which can be annoying. But she is a dog of extreme enthusiasm. She has so much enthusiasm. She's happy, and she's just cheerful and happy, like to the nth degree. So she's taught, she teaches me to be joyful in every day, which is really kind of a fantastic thing, right? It's fantastic to see the dog's joy in every day and to think, oh yeah, I can be more joyful, can't I? And so she's yeah, that's her gift, that's her charm. And she's funny and she's charming, and she makes weird little things up for herself. Like her new thing is, through the woods where I walk her in the morning, she's found all these single gloves that people have lost over the winter. So every day she buries them all in different places along the trail. And then the next day she digs them up. She moves each glove. She has about 5 of them on the go now, and moves them to a different location, reburies them, and then digs them up again the next. So she makes her own fun. And she's very excited about the gloves. So, but I've never had a dog do a thing like that. So that's she's great that way. Yeah.
Have your dogs been your dogs, or are you and the dog's been capable of sharing? I mean, some people's dogs just, they move about from person to person without too much trauma, and other dogs just don't want to be away from their human. I mean, who owns who?
Yeah, my first dog, Hazel, she was owned by me and my partner at the time. So she moved between our 2 houses when we weren't together anymore. And so she was always a shared dog, but that worked very well for lots of reasons. Also, for travel of any sort, because she always had a home to be when somebody was away. But the other dogs have been my dogs solely, and they're very, they're around me all the time. So they like other people, and they have their favorite people, and they have people they like and dislike, and they really like my partner, and all of this, but they're my dogs. So
You've talked about how dogs seem to know who to like and who not to like. Has that been an experience that you've had with your dogs? There were some anecdotes about that, but is that something that you've discovered with your dogs or observed?
yes, my dogs they don't like everybody the same. And even if if they have a degree of familiarity with people, some of those people they prefer over others. And I'm not sure why. It's not like the people are nicer to them or anything. So that kind of interests me. But they have their favorites. And I don't know what it's based on. It's based on their own, discernment, I suppose. And then they also have people they don't like.
It
And
puts me in mind of the scenes in movies where the dog instantly growls at an interloper or somebody that the family seems to like, but the dog knows better. Do you think there's, I know it's just a movie, but do you think there's some truth in that?
yes, I think dogs are super, super intuitive, and they can pick out good and bad people, I think. Yeah.
Um, Melanie asks, is Fig there with you? Can we meet her?
Yeah, Figgy. She's not feeling very well today because yesterday I think she ate a bunch of horse shit on the walk, and they're not supposed to do that because horses can be on drugs. But anyway, I couldn't stop her. So she's in the kitchen resting, but I will call her and see if she will come in. Figgy, Figs, come here, come here, come here. You come up here. You come up. You come up. Up, up. Just get up. There you go. There she is.
Hello, Fig.
So, baby, you're a good girl. I'm feeling bad. feeling a little sick. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, she's certainly seems calm now. I mean, the descriptions early on, where she's just, as you say, a small mouth full of small knives,
Yeah.
it's really kind of appalling. And it was, but I enjoyed your mother's, as you say, sanguine approach to the dismemberment by Figgy.
Yes, my mother was on blood thinners when Figgy's knives, so she had she's got heart issues, and so she bled a lot. It was kind of bad when she came, but Figgy's very sweet now, as you can see.
Yeah.
He's a good dog. She's feeling a bit bad. Okay, I'm gonna send you Reagan. Sorry.
Okay, that's a good appearance. Yeah. What do they say?
Saying,
Don't do movies with dogs or kids.
I guess she's not going. Whatever.
I think that was, I don't see any other questions yet. So with respect to the sections in the book, of course, you come to endings. And I don't think there are any spoilers in this if you talk about how you decide to end a book, not just this book, but any book. I mean, sometimes I would imagine the story is just over, but in something like a memoir, how do you end it?
Well, just like in a novel, the journey comes to an end, doesn't it? Comes to a natural end. And so I had, when I was writing this book, I had thought really that I was telling the story of the dog. I was talking about Fig, and so the ending would have to do with her. Okay, you can get down now. Let's just get down, maybe. Oh, but it turns out that the story was also really just about my learning to accept the new dog, and so really the story had to kind of end with my own revelation of that, and that in order to accept the new dog, I had to leave the old dog in the past. So that seemed like the natural place to end the book. Usually there is a natural place, I think, when you look at the book as being a journey, and there is some place where the journey feels like it has come to an end.
The places that you go with Fig, you were very clear that although you go every day is new. So no walk gets old. Is that how Fig experiences it as well, do you think?
I think so. Like, it's the familiar place, so she recognizes certain things about, like her gloves, right? She knows the gloves or where the gloves are, so she knows all of that. But then a new thing will happen, right? A new animal will come across the path, or something. A new person will be there. It changes all the time.
You've said that Vizslas are bred to be hunting dogs.
Bird dogs.
Bird dog do you have to cope with that with Fig? Does she have to be curbed in her instincts?
She doesn't have a super high prey drive, so not really. No, she's kind of oversensitive. Like, I don't know. She's also got, but she's got a crazy focus. So I don't know. I don't think the hunting life would have been a good one for her, because she has this crazy intense hyper focus, but then she also has some sensitivities and fear. She's too tender a dog. So I don't think, anyway, I think she's better not being a hunting dog. But my previous dog, Charlotte, had a very high prey drive, and she would kill things. And I mean, I tried to stop her, but she would just, I remember once I had been late feeding her supper, and I thought I'd take her for a walk before I gave her supper. Usually I gave it to her at a certain time. We went for a walk and she killed a squirrel because she was hungry. So that was like, okay, I won't do that again. But Figgy's never killed it. She's not a killer. She's a lover, not a fighter. So, so I don't have
I'm
to worry
imagining
about it.
this is the gazillionth interview about this book. What would you say is the developing ratio of dog specific questions to other kinds of questions? I mean, this must be a real dog lover book.
Yeah, hopefully. It's a lot of dog questions, I think. Yeah, more so than the other questions. Yeah, I mean, because dogs are an easier point of entry. I mean, the writing part is interesting if you're a writer or you want to be a writer, not necessarily that interest. I think the dog is a more interesting kind of place of entry. So
one of the elements that you talk about is discipline, and your description of how monks train dogs which involves a hierarchical master-servant kind of relationship, which doesn't appear to be your style.
No, it's not. I mean, a lot of people, people have different things that they advocate, but I'm not a big disciplinarian. Like my approach is just like it would be if I had met another person. It's just like, okay, I'm going to get to know this creature. I'm going to figure them out. Who are they? And then how can I work with who they are, rather than imposing my will, like right from the beginning onto them. So with a dog, but with the puppy, I mean, I know, there has to be structure, but structure and discipline are different things. Structure is a routine, and it's doing things at the same time, something they can rely on, so they can understand the limits of their life and what happens in their life. But I don't believe in disciplining them, really. I just kind of work around their personality, and it's always worked fine. And the more I get to know them, the easier it is to figure out what to do for them. Like Figgy, because of her hypersensitivity and the way she works very well with a routine. A routine is really good for her because it's just reassuring and stabilizing, and a very kind of, calm routine. And so, yeah, so I know that about her, and I know, so I can make those choices to make a life that works for her. That's my approach, but it's other people's approach too. It's not just my approach.
Yeah.
Other dog trainers do things like that.
And dogs, I've observed, can be quite temporally oriented. Whether it's, our grand dogger, she's never hungry because she's always eating, but she knows that 5 o'clock it's like she can tell time. 5 o'clock is dinner time. And is that a function of structure, or is that something else?
Yeah, I think that's probably structure. They eat probably around a certain time every day, so they expect their food at a certain time every day. There's ways they can tell kind of what time it is by light, and just the way they're very good at reading us and the cues that we give them to tell them what's going on. So,
Well, we're getting close to the end of our time, and I don't want to end without offering people another opportunity to ask questions. We've had a couple, and I don't know if anybody else wants to throw something else into the mix, but now's the chance before we close up. While we're waiting, I can't remember, how old is Fig now?
she's 3.5, should be 4 in the fall.
So where does that put her? Does that make her a mature dog, or is she still learning things?
Well, Vishas are notoriously slow to mature, so I say she's not a mature dog yet. I think they're mature somewhere around 6, honestly. So she's still pretty young dog and behaves very much like a young dog, although she's capable of sleeping in the day and things that she wasn't before. But they go fast, dogs. Like she's already, I noticed the other day, got a bit of gray under her chin, and it's just like, oh, slow down.
Well, as you say there, you observed her, or the vet told you her heart rate when she was a puppy, and I guess if that's how fast your heart beats, you've only got so many beats in you. The how does she react to other dogs? Here in the county, we have a dog park in Picton, and some dogs, you see their owners taking them around, but they won't bring them into the dog park, and other dogs, the dog park is where they like to be. How does Fig like that circumstance? Dogs or no
Yes.
other dogs?
Well, the bad thing about Fig is that I got her just before the pandemic, but her second round of puppy classes were canceled in the pandemic. So she didn't get the dog socialization that she would have got if she'd been able to kind of go to all the levels that I usually take the dogs to. So she's not a great fan of other dogs. She barks at them. She's got dogs she knows and she's comfortable with, and she loves those dogs. And I do take her periodically, once a week. I take her to a dog park, and she's fine when she's off the leash with other dogs. But on the leash, she's a bit nervous and barks. And so she's got a bit of that, which is, and sometimes in the car, a really unpleasant behavior. She'll bark at other dogs from the safety of the car. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's
not
all about the
ideal, but
leash.
yeah, they don't like the leash. The leash confines them and they feel trapped. And then if they were just off the leash, they could, but you can't always let them off the leash in the streets and things. So,
Right.
but I'm working
Well,
on it. It's a work in progress.
yeah, well, aren't we all?
Yeah.
Uh, well, I guess I know that there's another webinar coming up shortly, and we have to head off so that other people have a chance to set up. So I'll say thank you again to you, Helen, for taking the time with us. It's been great. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you, Sheila. Thanks for all your questions. Thanks everybody for coming out there on this beautiful
Yeah,
day.
thanks to everyone who's joined.
Yeah.
Bye for now.
Bye.